Tonight I'm going to Poppins.
What have I done?
It raises the problem of sex.
Ah, sure, you matron. I wouldn't dream of bothering you in that way.
Oh.
Oh, look what he's done to my pistol.
Ooh, yes, that's a very good one.
I wouldn't fancy a poke with that.
What did you say?
It's disgusting.
Kenneth was just very direct, arched, theatrical Queen that went straight to the point. I mean, I just think he was brilliant at doing that.
No, Barbara. Tent up first, bunk up later.
Mischief. That's his enduring quality. That's why the kids like him. That's why the teenagers like him. That's why you continue to like him.
Yes, that's right.
Right from the beginning, from the first appearance on Hancock.
Hancock to control tower. Something strange is happening. There's a peculiar knocking sound on the windscreen. We'll slide cockpit open to see what's wrong.
Good evening. It's a nice cold here. Can I come in?
He sounded like somebody who would almost have lived in the radio set, like some gremlin or a goblin. You couldn't actually imagine him as a flesh and blood figure.
Who's stop messing about?
His characters achieved a sort of heightened reality. In other words, they were big and they were over the top, and he'd use every range of his voice and flare his nostrils and open his eyes.
My bowels are perfectly all right. Why bring them into it?
Well, as you well know, Sir Bernard, irregularity can cause slight fever symptoms.
I'm not irregular. I'll have you know I'm one of the most regular fellows in the business.
The American Indians have a mythical figure called the trickster, that is a being who can take on the attributes of a lot of other beings. He can become a tiger, he can become a snake, he can become a horse. And Kenneth, I suddenly realised, is kind of the trickster of the English class system. The way he could go from those long, extravagant vowels of the upper class, and he could swoop down into the guttural Cockney working class vulgarity in a single sentence.
My father was a Cockney. No, he didn't talk like me at all. No, he hated my kind of talk. He always said, what are you going around with a plum in your mouth for? Talk like that for? Putting it on, giving yourself airs. Well, I wasn't giving myself airs at all, I think.
I realised that actually, if I really sort of had one drink too many, I could actually let go with it and actually almost start to become Kenneth Williams. And then, you see, you start to realise that, in fact, there is more than one voice, you see, because it's a very patrician kind of avuncular, kind of refined voice. But then you can also go, in the drop of a net, into kind of costermonger Cockney, you see, like that.
Oh, you got him off to a tee. And I heard another man on a bus getting off, and the conductor had said, he'd called out, Regent Street, Piccadilly, Shaftesbury Avenue, and this man coming down the stairs said, did you say Let's Be Avenue? And the conductor said, no, I didn't, but do you want to make something of it? And he said, no, not without Miss Strawberries, and got off. Completely illogical line. Not without Miss Strawberries. What on earth's he mean?
Was he a gutter snipe, or was he a toff? Or was he in some strange way both? Well, of course he was in some strange way both. And I think that dated back to his childhood, where he felt himself to be something of a changeling, some sort of princely character who had been dropped in on this rather unfortunate and rowdy inner-city family. He was a great Londoner, loved London. He came from a completely London family with all its old-fashioned musical humour and old-fashioned musical attitudes too. His father was a fairly fairly rough and yet Victorian, stern father, and made life pretty uncomfortable for Kenneth and his sister.
Well, yours is one of the few shops remaining that is like the shop my father had in Marchmont Street, Peter.
That's right.
My father had no time for anything fancy, you know. I mean, a man I remember once came into the shop. Oh, I'd like a blow wave. And he said, blow? You'll get no blow waves from me. I'm not doing no blow waves. What are you, blooming iron? Iron off? Iron? I'm not having no irons in my shop. Get out. I usually have the blow wave.
Yes, well, I'm no good at that, sir. But I know where I am with an iron.
My mother used to take the cash, and one of the customers, he said to me, I was there, he said, you know, she's got that little television so that we could watch the racing. So I said to her, you know, that's too small, you want to get the new Echo model, lovely, is 17-inch console. He said, and your mother turned around, she said, oh, 17 inches, you console anyone. He said, we all laughed. He said, don't expect to hear that. He said, do you, from a venerable, grey-haired old lady? I said, no. Well, this is, she's not typical, my mother.
She always loved numbers. Numbers like I'm a lady policeman. She was very fond of that. Yes, always did that number. She used to sing, I'm a lady policeman. I'm ever so ladylike. Oh, I'm ever so ladylike. Ta-ra-ra. When I draw me truncheon, nobody gets a strike. Oh.
In his element, singing these real old pub songs, and he loved them. I think he felt very safe and secure with that kind of environment. Just the other day, an actor who'd worked with Kenneth on one occasion stopped me in the street and said that he'd seen my show and said that it really had brought Kenneth back to him. And he said it reminded him of a time when he was in his local pub in Hammersmith and Kenneth was in there. And he said that Kenneth was entertaining the entire pub, whether they wanted it or not. And when it came to closing time, he actually stood against the bar and said, no, nobody leaves. You dare try and put your glasses on the bar. You're all going to stay here, do you hear? And he actually kept them there. They had a lock-in, and he stayed there until 2 in the morning, entertaining until they were exhausted, and then probably went home and wrote in his diary, I behaved appalling last night. I was drunk and made an absolute fool of myself. That was the dichotomy of Kenneth.
His talent as a performer began to emerge without a doubt during the war when he was out in the Far East in Singapore. Very campy, very theatrical, full of people who wanted to go into the business, and indeed did when they got back to London.
Stop trembling, Jack. You're making the tankers rattle.
Oh, you gave me a tone, Captain. I'll see.
Stop talking, Jack. I understand you haven't seen me, Jack. Close one eye for no. I'm in hiding, Jack, and no one's to get wind that I'm here. I'm riding out of town as soon as it's dark. Get some fodder for my horse and bring me some ale. Not now, Jack. As soon as the gang have gone on duty. You understand, Jack? Close one eye for yes.
It was seen by Orson Welles, and they asked me to be in his production of Moby Dick. I was playing the lookout, I was doing all that. She blows! Oh, great white spout! She blows! Oh, that voice. I thought about sperm whales. Awful, graphic, straight on and on and on. And the man that was doing all the swaying and the movement was Billy Chappell, and he said, I'd like you to be in this musical I'm doing, a Sandy Wilson show. So that led into that, you see. I did a musical about a boy who ran a newspaper, a sort of, you know, balmy, juvenile New Statesman thing. And I did that. And the audition was ludicrous because they said, you've got to sing this song.
And in a deep bass voice, he launched into a nautical ballad, which went, I think, tossed in the cradle of the deep. Billy said, oh, Kenneth, come on. You know perfectly well this part is a 12-year-old boy.
They said, oh, no, that's quite wrong. You'll be in short trousers, you know. I said, what? In short trousers. So try to make it boyish. I'm your power, just your power. And it was terrible to get up there because I'm by nature a baritone. And I'm a natural baritone. I can't do anything in the tenor range, let alone soprano.
I think he must have been at least 30. He could pass on stage for a 12-year-old boy. Admittedly a rather precocious one. And it's remarkable, really, because, you know, I mean, the Buccaneer made him a star, which he was rather grudging about in his diary. I think he'd sooner have been made a star for something a little more serious, perhaps, because as far as he was concerned, the Buccaneer was, well, a trivial little musical.
We don't discuss it.
And he went straight into review from the Buccaneer, actually, to share my latest.
Green?
What a ridiculous colour for a suit. Green!
Lettuce green, if you don't mind. Oh, don't worry about them. They don't like my lettuce green suit, and they don't like the fact that I grew my own lettuce just from an ordinary packet of seeds. They're all standing there behind me, waiting for me to open the show. They expect me to sing some terrible opening chorus. I told the producer, I said, oh no, I am an actor. She said your secret is safe with me. Charming.
Extraordinary name for a review, Share My Lettuce, isn't it? Yeah. I thought it would be about rabbits or something, you know, everybody walking about like that.
A ridiculous supposition.
I had never, ever seen anything quite like it. I'd never seen anything quite as neat.
There's no flies on me, dear. I was in this review, you see, and the men were all supposed to come on and dance with a piece of chiffon which floated down, and they took it in their arms and danced, you see. Some of the blokes refused to do it, so I'm not dancing. Furious. But I was agreeing. I agree with everything. I said, oh, it's lovely. Going to the West End, anything to get to the West End, you see. My bit didn't come down. So I went round sort of trying to reach, you know, trying to pinch other boys' bits of chiffon. And the management came around and said, brilliant, you looking for the chiffon? Brilliant, keep it in. So we did. For the rest of the show, it became a comedy number.
There were 3 hit reviews in a row. But review was just about on its way out, really. It was on its last legs.
Would you say this was a review in the old tradition or a new type of review?
I'd say it was a compromise, wouldn't you have known?
Definitely, yes. When he wanted to work with you, he was more than the easiest person to work with. It was joy. If he didn't happen to feel like it, it was the most hateful thing that I can possibly think of. It was like trying to work with, well, I don't know, a tank. You know, a tank that was coming towards you.
I'm always cooperative, very professional. Yeah, do you mind? No, the lines that you put in, if it comes to that, really.
He said, what we've got to do is to ad-lib, improvise, and add on to this rubbish that we have here, and make it good. We were like one voice coming out of 2 people. You know those people in life who live together so long that they always overlap each other when they talk? One starts and somebody else carries on, but the other one hasn't stopped. And so we were constantly overlapping each other and repeating each other's phrases. And it was terribly funny.
You don't mean that.
I do. You're quite lovely.
She's just saying it.
By the way, we're engaged.
What?
I found him very easy to work with. I mean, the thing about Kenneth is that I was never a threat to him work-wise, in the sense that I was always his feed or a person feeding stuff to him. I was never an equal, funny person. He was kind of cruel, maybe, in his diaries to some people who were equal to him. But I wasn't, so I never had any trouble with Kenneth at all.
We understand each other, with some difficulty, but we do understand each other. Well, I don't know much about that.
When we were doing One Over the Eight in the Duke of York's many years ago in the 60s, we had one particular sketch called the hairdressing sketch, where I was sitting on a stool with a sheet round my neck like a hairdresser's, and he came in and doing the very grand voice, yes, I know, all that grand voice, and was talking about the new hairstyles that were going to be done then. And what he was supposed to say was, what you need is a blow wave. And I said, what? He said, blow wave, a wave that goes right through and blows away. And this particular night, he made the mistake and said, what you need is a blow job. I said, a what? He said, a blow? Oh, no, wait a minute. And he actually managed to make a joke out of that. The audience was in hysterics, because this was almost a forbidden word to use in the 60s. But we got away with it. No, none of the papers picked it up, but he actually made the mistake.
What do you think I am, a fool?
Look at you, I sometimes wonder.
I'm not sure if it was a mistake. I think it was an ad-lib to see what would happen.
Kenneth is a person who crossed barriers between comedy and acting. And I think he showed that someone who obviously was a fine actor could also become a stand-up comedian. And I think that it was difficult for Kenneth at first because he had all the nerves of an actor going into being a comedian. And I think it was very difficult for him perhaps to just go out there and just to sort of present himself as a comedian rather than having a script to hide behind. But he had the guts to get up and do it.
He did start off as a classical actor, as he saw it, in rep, doing Ibsen and Shaw and Shakespeare as well. And I think that was his fantasy of himself as when he started off, as being that kind of an actor. After all, he did understudy Richard Burton in The Seagull.
I've never heard such name dropping.
I'd actually love to have seen him play Lady Bracknell.
A handbag.
And he would have been intense and deadly in his treatment of it, of somebody pretending to be classy while actually being your absolutely appalling Daily Mail reading, lower middle class Hyacinth Bucket animal, which is what Lady Bracknell is. And he would have he would have made that character stunning.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yes, Edith, in fact, I was told on Legal Authority afterwards, said, why have you cast him? Why have you cast Kenneth Williams? And apparently the producer said, I think he's very good in the role. And she said, but he's got such a peculiar voice.
He did a play with Dame Edith Evans called Gentle Jack. And his entrance in this, he was playing a sort of Puck-like character, was to come down a rope. And that was how he, and onto the stage, and that's how he first entered. And after he'd been doing this on tour for a while, he came into the West End, and so far, perfectly straight. And the night I went, he obviously decided he couldn't live without the comedy anymore, so he came down the rope and turned to the audience and said, hello. And the audience, we all broke up laughing, big cheer for Kenneth. And it was pretty well impossible to get back into the part, so to speak, because now we'd got the funny Kenneth Williams. And Dame Edith was heard to say, we don't want personal asides to the audience, Kenneth, it's not in the script.
And got back to this hotel where we were staying, and we were the only two because everyone else had dined, you know. We were, well, it was 11 o'clock at night, you know, and everyone else had gone. But these 2 tin plates were over a bit of cold ham and lettuce. And we sat in the corner of this empty room, and an old fart who was the night porter. As the night porter, who was deputising both as night porter and waiter, came in and said to Dame Edith, do you fancy a drop? And she said, oh, yes, a half bottle of Beaujolais would not come amiss. He said, I thought you'd fancy that. I got a drop in the sideboard for you. And bent over to get it, and then broke wind with alarming ferocity. It really rang out appallingly. And she said to me, this place has gone off terribly.
Shouting, please.
When you see him in the Carry On films, there's that thing of him wanting to get terribly close to proper acting.
You there! Is that remark addressed to me?
That's terribly close to rather good acting, but isn't quite, because there's something so manically intense about it. It is funny. Although he's not being overtly funny there in those scenes where he's coldly and condescendingly talking to the rest of the characters.
Stand to attention when I'm talking.
Why?
Why? Don't ask why. Do as you're told. You're in the army, son.
Oh, not quite. I'm still a civilian, with civilian rights. I don't shout.
That kind of character is doubtless a retread.
What is your name?
Of his stage work.
Please.
Bailey, James Bailey. How do you do?
Which I never saw, which I would love to have seen.
I first saw Kenneth in a production of St. Joan, and he was playing the Dauphin. He was so kind of spare and lost. He was quite definitely giving a most wonderful, straight performance, and it never occurred to me that he would go on to become a wonderful comic. Little did anyone realise, except, I suppose, that very brilliant, extraordinary man, Dennis Mayne Wilson, saw him in it too, and thought how good he'd be with Tony Hancock.
In the very last act, there is a final extra scene in which the Dauphin has to age about 40 years, from this Aussie thing to a crabby, horrible old man, which normally takes lights out, quick makeup change, really limp and come on again. Williams has turned his back, turned round, and was done in one.
I played it very old, you know.
Had he stayed as a straight actor, he could have reached the heights of Guinness, I suspect. You know, and whether I did him a service or a disservice, I don't know.
When in doubt, get someone funny.
The one voice he had on Hancock, which caught on tremendously and had its own catchphrases, was what was known as the snide voice.
Good evening.
And Hancock particularly hated that voice because it was a ready-made laugh. It was a formula thing. And that's what he was out to eradicate, principally, as the first step towards this pure comedy.
More than just a silly voice. It's the same as with Peter Sellers. It's never just a voice. It's the whole sort of...
It's demonic and driven and drinking and looking for the next thing and trying to refine some essence out of comedy, which meant that he was shedding bits of what he had already done all the time. And the bits that were shed were usually people, cast members, and Kenneth became a casualty of that, which made him very bitter about Hancock ever afterwards. Feel with Kenneth Horne, who was completely imperturbable. He didn't really need to be there. He was a successful businessman. He had another life completely. although he had a sort of a strange bohemian side. He had great ambitions to play the saxophone and that sort of thing, which is completely unlikely for a man of that type. But that made him a still centre for some wonderful and very rude comedy. He was a kind of human maypole around which that cast and Round the Horn danced.
One chap there who'd been arrested for kissing a strange girl in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. A foolish thing to do, and as the magistrate said...
In future, you want to use a bit of common.
Ken needed a dad, you know, he hadn't got a dad because his dad had committed suicide a long time before, and I think he regarded Kenneth Horne as a sort of father figure.
Recently I was asked to organise a cabaret for the Director-General of the BBC. They said they wanted something different, so I popped down to a little agency in the Charing Cross Road that I'd heard of. It was called Boner Performers. Hello, anybody there?
Hello, I'm Julian. This is my friend Sandy.
We've written a script about two elderly actors going for doing a job, and the producer said, this isn't funny, they're just sad. And we said, well, why don't you make them chorus boys? And he went, yeah, fine, no problem. So we just sat down and wrote down a script. It took us about 5 minutes to write the first one.
We can get you the great Omi Poloni. He's one of ours, isn't he, Jules? Comes on, you see, wearing this leopard skin, you see. He's a great butch Omi with... I mean, he's got these thews like an oak and bulging lallies.
I'll take him then.
Oh, you can't have him on the 15th. That's the night for washing his hair.
We were amazed by the laughter of the audience. We thought, crikey, what's happened here? You know, they really are loving these two people.
Would I have vardered any of them, do you think?
Oh, it's got all the Polari in it. It's reversed, really, wasn't it? Ecaf was face backwards, hair was Raya, that's hair backwards. It was just backwards words, so that you would speak in public, in a pub or whatever, in private code, without everyone knowing what you were saying.
Exactly.
It was Dolly Ecaf was a nice face, and if it was rotten face, Naff Ecaf, and nobody knew you were insulting them. Your point, wasn't it? It was, Because I remember George Rose saying to me, "Oh, Delauza lappers on the Striller's boner." And I said, what on
earth did that mean?
Plays the piano lovely.
If the governors then had known what was being said, it was as bad as anything that has ever appeared on television.
We're actual homeopathic practitioners. Oh, yes. Yes, we're not recognised by doctors, no. But we're well known up all the all-night chemists, aren't we?
75% of the people who sat down, parents and children, to listen to Round the Horn, had no idea that these guys were meant to be homosexuals. I'm convinced, I'm sure it wasn't just kids, because the comedy, although there was a bit of Mrs. Double Entendre going on, it was operating on so many other comic levels, and of course against the complete avuncular straightness in every sense of Kenneth Horne.
Right, now get on the couch.
Get on the couch, go on.
Well, I will if you two will only shift up a bit.
I don't think people necessarily thought terribly much about his sexual orientation through his performances until he came to present the International Cabaret Show on the BBC.
I was standing there in my peignoir, you know, looking like an advert for soft furnishings, you know. And the suit had gone, so I flew along the corridor, billowing away, you know, in your actual peignoir, you see. And I went into the producer and I said, Stu, he's called Stuart. I said, here, Stu. I said, my stuff's gone, the suit's gone, it's vanished. He said, what? I said, yeah, it's gone. He said, did you bolt the door? I said, no. Why should... He said, well, you should. I said, well, I thought I was coming to International Cabaret, you know, not a den of thieves. He said, you don't know the half of it, ducky. He said, last week I lost 48 Christmas trees in the middle of July.
Kenneth loved the high camp in his own performances, but only if he was doing it. I mean, he didn't like other people doing it. He resented Larry Grayson and John Inman and people like that because he felt that they were somehow encroaching on his territory.
A lot of comedians are camp and work camp. Doesn't mean to say that they're gay or anything like that, but it's a wonderful leveller for people to like you. It has a coziness about it. And you say, please like me. And if you like me, then you laugh. And that's the drug we're all after.
Laugh? I nearly brought my own beer.
Bruce Forsyth's very camp, isn't he, I think, you see? He'd hate me for saying it, but I think he works in a sort of slightly effeminate way. I think most comics do, actually.
You're so right.
I mean, Kenneth didn't just play outrageously camp people, did he? I mean, he played this old farmer and did that marvellous song.
Joe, he was a young court wangler, monging greebles did he go, and he loved a bogler's daughter by the name of Chiswick Flo. Vain she was, and like a grusset, though her gander parts were fine. But she sneered at his court wangle as it hung upon the line.
It's been my experience that once young people sample the delights of country life and the wonders of nature, they just can't get enough of it.
That's what the Carry-Ons were about in a certain way. They are about English repression. They're about a very specific part of Englishness. And it's that bit which ain't Norwegian and isn't Spanish. It's purely English.
Now really, let's see those chests come out. And fling and in. And fling and in. And fling. Matron, take them away.
If you said to him, you know, oh, Kenneth, all this, it's a bit smutty, this stuff, these carry-ons, all that gag you're telling. And he'd then say to you, Twelfth Night, these be her great C's, her U's and her T's.
And thus maketh she her great P, has only one connotation, and it's a very rude one. And if you don't understand it, they've made sure in the Temple edition by saying at the end, the actor can have this explained to him by any common sailor. I didn't need any common sailors to tell me.
You may not realize it, but I was once a weak man.
Once a week's enough for any man.
It's fairly easy to get it up. It's getting it to stay up. That's what counts.
Young chickens may be soft and tender, but the older birds have more on them.
True. It'll take a lot more stuffing.
The most interesting thing about Kenneth Williams and the Carry-On films was when they tried to give him more money, and he turned it down. He said, I won't take a penny more for doing this sort of rubbish.
He was appalled at the scripts. He was appalled at what he was being asked to do. He was appalled at his performances most of the time. And yet, I thought the great thing about him was that you never saw it. You never saw there was any hint in his performances that he was, you know, disgusted with what he was doing or disgusted with the script. He gave everything.
Exactly.
He couldn't resist the family feeling of just being on that set with those people, among whom were so many friends. It was an alternative family to him, a better one, really, for him than the one he'd actually come from. And there were so many close friends. And he enjoyed the affectionate side of the women in the cast.
You're a comely wench. There's nothing to stop me forcing my attentions on you.
Oh, promises!
Oh, get off! She's incorrigible.
And the men were very congenial, except the ones he didn't like.
I shall name. No.
I made a lady scream.
Very interesting. How?
I said, good morning. Should that have frightened her? Well, come on, you look as if ladies often scream at you.
Flatterer. You must have an electric sex appeal.
I have not.
There's another explanation.
What's that?
No, I can't say.
Come on, tell me.
No.
Why?
You'll be cross.
I will not be cross.
You promise?
Of course I promise. Scats on her now. Come on, tell me. Why did she scream when I only looked at her?
That's it.
What's it?
Your face.
My what?
Kenneth, for some reason, didn't like Sid at all.
Disgusting.
I suspect he was a little homophobic. I don't think he liked that sort of goings-on. I don't think he liked Kenneth's forthright entertainment value.
Come on, whiskey.
Certainly not. We are fully temperance.
I don't care if you're full of flatulence. I've been on the trail 6 days non-stop.
I can't help that.
I don't like people who get in my way.
I can't help that.
And I just shot 3 men who did.
Oh, well, in that case, perhaps just a little one.
He was quite crafty. In a sort of rather Machiavellian way, actually.
I'm not a fool, you know.
And he clawed his way to the top of every scene. If you take Carry-On films and every scene he's in, you'll work out that the camera basically is on him. He's the guy in charge.
Do I look like a man who sells funny postcards?
Not a bit. Actually, you look more like the chappie on the funny postcards.
I hardly think that's possible.
No matter how bad the scripts were, and he did complain about them severally and send quite a few of them back at first, he only had to do those jokes, those terrible jokes, once. Preferably only one take, too.
Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me!
I felt very underused. I certainly got the feelings from reading the diaries that, you know, every time he was asked to do a carry-on film, something in him died. And you can feel that pain.
Am I all right? Of course I'm all right. All right? Yes. Why shouldn't I be all right? Oh, this is awful. I wish I was dead.
But Orlando, you are dead.
What? Oh, yes, I am. What a life.
The subject is stopping hiccups, starting now.
You must alter the rhythms that have been established in the suspiratory diaphragms. Inhale deeply and then recite. The old order changes, the replace the new, and God wills himself in many ways. As one good custom should corrupt the world, comfort thyself, what comfort is in me. I have lived my life, and that which I have done may he within himself make sure, but thou.
Peter Jones, a challenge.
You'd be better off with the hiccups.
Unlike most performers, he knew when the audience were beginning to go off the boil, instinctively and right at the top. Whereas other performers only know that they're cooling down when it's almost frozen and it's very hard to bring them back. Ken knew very quickly, almost like a producer, although he was in it, when they were going off the boil. And at that point, he would look up to the box to me, and I would simply raise my hands to him, and then Kenneth would go.
Come all the way from Great Portland Street. I'm not going to be made a fool of by that great joke. Also, very rude to me before this show began. Very rude to me before this show began.
Was he? What did you say?
I said it's an all-male panel on tonight, and he looked at me and said, we're all-male.
It was a bit like an internet, you know, he could instantly access so much information. Because he was also extremely well read, he can just pull in all kinds of genres and styles and books and stories and this and that and the other and expressions and unusual adverbs he's picked up and all the rest of it, and it just goes whoom.
When I was in Rangoon and saw it, I was amazed at the spectacle that the roof presented. It was entirely gold leaf covering it, and they told me that during the occupation by the Japanese it had been subjected to all kinds of appalling ravages, such as would be unbelievable to ordinary civilized people. However, all this was restored by the time we saw it, and as the train moved away from the station and we had this last glimpse of the Shwedagon Pagoda, one of the men turned to me in my party and said, "Ah, the Shwedagon, I wish Shwedagon," which was a rather rotten pun, but nevertheless he did say it. That's what he...
Kenneth once introduced me to a phrase of Cyril Connolly's about exhausting yourself by spinning words into the air. And Kenneth was one of those people who could set the party on a roar. He was the most brilliant conversationalist.
If you get somebody like, for instance, Coral Brown.
A very good friend.
Yes.
I love her,
I
yes.
like Coral. She was taken on the set of Oedipus Rex, you know, the Peter Brook production, and the set predominantly was a huge phallus. It was 19 foot high and gold. And they said, "What do you think of the set?" And she said, "Well, it's no one I know."
I know that often the following morning, after he'd really had a wonderful night where everyone had loved him and he'd been fantastic, outrageous, the morning would come and he'd feel so fed up that all he'd done the day before was waste his energy, waste all that talent and gift on telling a few stories, putting a good tag across. That's all. That's all he felt he was towards the end, and that infuriated him.
The essence of all true communication is a lack of inhibition, isn't it? That's the essence of it. If you're going to throw a party and everyone's going to get together, you've got to have what they call an icebreaker. You know, people say, have a few drinks and a chat and all that, but I don't need it. You know, I've got it anyway. And I think that if you have a natural fluency, I always have had, then, you know, without people and chat, I always go straight to people and chat. If I can't think of a line to say, I just say something from a popular song. You know, I say things like, I like New York in June, how about you?
It was a strange combination of control and being out of control. This is what makes the mania all the more like a blowtorch or like a laser, because it's coming from this locked-in, literally tight-assed person. You know, the mouth's tight, the ass is tight, everything's tight, you know, and it's all locked up. It's like a little petrified sort of shop assistant from Hepworth's.
How do you rate yourself as a lover?
Oh, I don't do it. I'm not I know I'm asexual. I should have been a monk. I should have been a monk. No, I'm only interested in myself, and I would regard any kind of relationship as deeply intrusive. I mean, I regard privacy as the most important thing in my life, and anything which invaded that would be a threat. So consequently, I live a life of celibacy. I am not interested in the other.
He was one of those people of a generation who respected people who were discreet, who didn't talk about their private lives in public.
Oh, no, dear.
I mean, his line was, if you said to him, you know, are you gay? He would say, mentally, yes, spiritually, yes, physically, no. I don't do anything about it.
Our hearts are in
Always keep your wits about you, see? Don't let nothing distract you, especially women. They're the worst. Don't have nothing to do with them. Have nothing. Oh, hello.
I think all of Kenneth's friends knew that he was celibate. I think he gave that impression to us that relationships on a physical level weren't for him. And I think that's true. And I think that any time he tried to veer off that path, it was usually disastrous. When he went off on holidays to Tangier, if he ever tried to form some liaison with anybody, you know, it usually ended up in him catching some rather nasty illness for a while, you know. So, I mean, I think Kenneth felt life was telling him to lay off it anyway.
I'm the butchest thing you'll find round here, I can tell you. Well, I made sure of that. I betted a cast first, yes. Like to see anyone take advantage of me. Well, I should love it.
I think there was a sense in him that, not unlike his friend Joe Orton, who of course did everything that Kenneth Williams wanted to do but didn't, you know, there'd be Orton lying in Tangier, you know, oiled up, you know, having worked his way through about 20 Moroccan boys, you know, and Kenneth Williams is sitting there in his blazer, you know, still wanting to be like Joe, you know. One is total hedonism and the other one is total restraint, and of course they were very good friends.
I always find it so silly when people talk about Orton as you know, somebody with dark undertones and blackness, whereas he was great fun. And they used to play marvellous jokes. He used to write to the newspapers as Edna Wellthorpe. He used to write all these daft letters to the newspapers. And he wrote to the vicar of his local church and said, would you lend us the hall? As Edna Wellthorpe. I am secretary of the Spectre Players, pretending he was a secretary of a drama group. And we wish to mount this play, which is a wonderful plea for tolerance in homosexuality. It's called Nelson Was a Nance. We'd love to have the church hall. Would you? We were sure that your attitude with the church would be very tolerant, and you would lend us the church hall for nothing, for our production. He got a reply from the vicar saying, no, on the contrary, we're not lending the hall for that purpose, and I think lampooning a national hero is appalling. I thought sending out Nelson was dreadful, you see. So he wrote again. There's Mrs. Wellthorpe saying Edna's died. Doubtless you've read of her demise in the local paper. And I've taken over her work. I found in a cupboard under the stairs all her letters about the Spectre Players and her wonderful production, Nelson Was a Nance, and it went on all over again.
That sounds splendid.
Oh, it was a riot!
Orton was a kind of spectacle for him, I think, and also a standing reproach to him for not being more involved physically, for being unable, in fact, to embrace, I mean, literally embrace anybody else, or share his domesticity with everybody else.
I've got 2 rooms, kitchen and bathroom. I put the arpic down and run. Well, the smell is atrocious, isn't it? It's appalling. Every now and again, I have a great spring clean, but otherwise I don't do it regularly. My mother keeps her flat, you know, in pin pie order, but she does it regularly.
They were a kind of pair, and they lived as a kind of pair, across the landing from each other in separate flats. But she had the TV. Kenneth never owned one, so he would go across in the evening and watch TV at her place. And for all the world, like some ancient couple they became, particularly as he became ill and she became a little bit infirm too. So they almost became like a dreadful parody of man and wife.
This friend of Kenneth's, he used to do favours for him and Louis on a regular basis, and he really looked after them. One of his things that he used to do was to take them for drives in the country on a Sunday. And one day, Kenneth said, "Right, we're not going to our usual place, we're going to St. Ives." And so he said, "St. Ives, why?" He said, "Never mind, just come on, let's go." So they drove off, and they arrived in St. Ives, and Kenneth said, "Hang on, hang on." And they put up outside this house, with just a very ordinary house, with peeling paint on the windows, and dirty curtains hanging in the window, and a gate hanging off its hinge, and a rusty letterbox. And Kenneth just looked at the house and went, "Yes," made a few notes, and said, "Right, let's go home." And the friend couldn't figure out what this was all about, and he found out later that apparently a man had written a piece of hate mail to Kenneth in which he said, "You are a disgusting sodomite. You are guilty of the act of sodomy and you will die in hell. God hates sodomites and you must die in hell and pay for your sins." And Kenneth wrote back to him, because this man put his address at the top of the letter, which people don't normally do when they write hate mail.
Some people just can't leave it alone.
Kenneth wrote back to this gentleman and said, "Yes, well, first of all, I'm not a sodomite. I never engaged in such filthy practices, so your mind is obviously as filthy as the curtains hanging in your windows and the gate hanging off its hinges and your peeling paint on the window frames and your rusty letterbox. Please accept my compliments, and I hope you drop dead on receipt of this letter." And he'd gone to all that trouble to find out the details of this man's house just because of one letter. He'd driven right the way across the country to find out.
"You got me going, you did, you run swine!"
His opinion of himself could swing so tremendously from day to day. He could look at himself in a bathroom mirror one day and be so enraptured by what he saw that it was practically orgasmic.
First thing in the morning, I look in the mirror and think, what a dish, I think.
And then the next day, some little pimple would appear on his chin, and he would think he was the ugliest thing in the world.
What is this wretched old face ever going to accomplish?
And he'd be cast down for the rest of the day, and brutally nasty to everybody else, and so on. This is extraordinary.
Emerson said we have as many personalities as we have friends, and that's obviously true. So a bloke isn't the same with his grandma as he is with his wife. And he's not the same with his wife as he is with his mate at work, is he? So there's three personas, isn't there?
The sort of terrifying Jekyll and Hyde that he was. You know, on the one hand, he was this rather charming, urbane character, very funny, very witty. And this other side of him hated himself and hated so many people that you thought he adored. Extraordinary.
He recognised, I think, that he'd painted himself into a corner, both professionally and personally. Professionally because he knew that he had reduced himself to being a figure who was the king of the chat show circuit, but little else. And personally, because he was both wonderful but also impossible.
He set out to behave badly, I think, on many social occasions, which he was quite proud of because he'd never done it as a child, I think. He'd never been a naughty boy.
Many a time and oft we had him in our sitting room, literally dropping his trousers, dropping his underpants, revealing the bum. You look, it's hanging down in pleats, all of that. Very funny, but sometimes it went too far.
Dreadful, isn't it, though?
When they went on holiday to Torremolinos one time, this friend was with them, and they were on this plane full of little old ladies, and they were going through some very severe turbulence, and all these old ladies were genuflecting and getting very upset, and Kenneth started singing "Nearer My God to Thee" very, very loudly, and all these hymns, you know, see, and the stewardess came up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Williams, please, people are getting very upset. Would you please just keep it quiet?" He said, "No, we're all going to die, and we've all got to be ready for it. Come on, everybody sing, nearer my God to thee." He loved it. He couldn't wait to die, you know.
Friends, Romans, countrymen. I know. Oh, what's the use?
At the end of his life, he didn't find it funny at all. He was ill, he was fed up, and as he put in his diary in that last entry, oh, what's the bloody point?
When more of the facts came out in the coroner's court hearing and they recorded an open verdict, I think perhaps to save his mother, Lou, any pain, I think we realised that he probably did take his own life, and I guess one can understand that.
I sympathise with people who can't believe to this day that he could have done away with himself, but as early as the 40s, he's calling himself a suicidalist, which I take to be a word meaning somebody to whom these thoughts are occurring on a regular basis.
Yes, I put stuff like down about suicide and how one will go about it, what would be the best method, and all that kind of thing, you know. Looking back on it, of course, it's often, you know, quite amusing.
Why do you think you want to kill yourself?
Because of extremely low state of morale. And one actually does write something down which is practical in terms of how one thinks one should go about it.
It's always going on about, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it one of these days. If things get any worse, I will do it. And then they'll all be sorry, won't they? Yes, they'll wish they'd treated me a bit better, won't they?
The most dreadful thing that ever happened between us, really, was ages later. I saw him in the street, and I was having a party, and I said, "You must come." And he did come. But it was such a riotous, crowded party that we never heard the bell. And he did come, but he didn't get in. And that was terrible. And I don't think he ever forgave me for that.
We are a portion of everything we've ever loved. And I think it is those loves that form the tissue, if you like, of belief and faith. Because acting is all about faith. Performing is making an act of faith, believing that you can create reciprocity between the auditorium and the stage. And that's why when the atheist says, what if life's pointless, what if it's all a joke, has to be answered by the comedian. Well, if it is a joke, let's make it a good one.
I knew I was going to miss his voice and his extraordinary delivery and his extraordinary intelligence, really. Comic intelligence.
Come on now, stop messing about.
He goes down as a one-off. Some could say thank heaven.
Unique. Yes. Oh, yes, I'm a cult. He'll be saying that now. That's what he'll be saying, echoing into up there in heaven. I wish I could do the voice, because he'll be saying, oh, I'm a cult, I'm a cult. That's what he would want. At the end of your program, as the little dot disappears, he will want his voice saying,
I'm a cult figure, you see, I'm an enormous cult. I am. I'm one of the biggest cults you'll get round here, huh?